I will edit it out. Hi,
Hello.
welcome to, I'm Heidi McDonald. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Beat at ComicsBeat.com. We've started this as a series of chats, robust parlay. That was our first guest, Dean Haspiel, called it that. And I'm going to stick with the robust parlay. So I'm very happy to have today for our robust parlay none other than Joe Casey. Joe, hello, welcome.
Hello, how are you, Heidi?
I'm good. I'm good. And Joe has done so many things that his Wikipedia page kind of just got tired of updating. So it doesn't even it just kind of peters out. I mean, you recently were omnibified. Is that the word?
I guess I think that's coming this year. I don't know. It's not, I don't think it's out yet. I
Yeah,
was as shocked as anybody.
but they were announced that you were omnibified.
Yes, yes.
And and to be honest, I'd forgotten that you did a very substantial run on the Hulk all the way back in the 90s.
Well, it wasn't so substantial. It had its moments, but
Mhm.
yeah.
How many issues though?
Well, I was just under a year.
Oh,
I bridged the gap between Peter David and the
okay.
relaunch.
So, but that is one of the things that's being omnibified, which means it's
Correct.
being put in a big omnibus.
Of the ball crusher, as we call it.
Yes, yes, exactly. But you've just steamed on ahead since then, Joe, and with so many different projects, you are not only writing comics, so many comics they can't even fit them on one Wikipedia page. You've written all the great characters, right? You've written the X-Men, you've written the Avengers, you've written you wrote Batman and Superman too, right?
That's right. I've done it all, Heidi. I've done
Oh,
it all.
okay. Well, and then you also have done things. You're part of Man of Action, which is a studio. Is that the right word?
We could call it a studio. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just what Man of Action should be called is actually part of it's the big question about it.
That's right.
And you also through that you have created Ben 10 backpacks and lunchboxes everywhere, as well as Generator Rex. You have working on a lot of animated shows over the years, and you also made your own Gonzo film based on your own Gonzo comic called Officer Downe. So,
True.
have I left anything out?
Yes, but that's fine. You can't get it all in there, believe me.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
Uh, it's funny. I didn't even think past. I just wanted to break into comics when I was a kid, and I thought breaking in would be the big hurdle. It seemed
Mm,
so unimaginable that once I did break in, I realized, oh, now I got to figure out what to do next, and then it was having a career.
right.
But before that, it seemed like such a mountain to climb to get into this business. But I didn't ever really think past it. I never thought it was going to happen. So why bother manifesting anything beyond that? And then I got in and I had to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there you go. Well, hold on. Now I'm having, sorry, little technical difficulties here. I just realized I do need to reopen a window, but we are just figuring this out still.
We're just hanging on.
We're
Technology
just,
tries to
I
get all the
zoomed
way from
all
us.
the time, and we have a couple people watching, so we will take questions or comments. So if you have some, you can always put them in the chat. Yeah, Joe. So what? Boy, I don't even know where to begin because you've had this parallel career as seemingly nice, normal comics writer, like we need the guy, we need the, who's good on time and nice, he'll turn in 10 X-Men scripts. Let's call Joe Casey, like who do we get? But then you have this whole other career. I think it is Gonzo. I would have to describe it as Gonzo. You've done so many weird Gonzo comics. I just looked on some page. It says that Automatic Kafka was for Vertigo, but it was for Wildstorm, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was for a while.
yes, exactly. So you did Vertigo comics that weren't even at Vertigo. They were, at Wildstorm. And then, I remember you did that Miami Vice comic for
I did with Jim
Lion
Mahfood.
Forge.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
which was Gonzo AF. Um,
Yeah.
so when did you know that you wanted to, be the secret agent, I guess?
Well, I mean, I mean, I grew up in the 80s when those kind of subversive comics were happening. So all the independent stuff like American Flag and Badger and Nexus and Mage and Grendel and all that kind of stuff. And then going into Frank Miller stuff, Electra Assassin, Bill Sienkiewicz on New Mutants. I mean, that stuff is all my jam when I was a kid. So when I got in, finally, I realized, oh, I could do that type of material. It wasn't when I started doing Automatic Kafka was kind of a pretty much of an outlier. There was no other mainstream comics doing that kind of weird stuff. And having Ashley Wood as the artist certainly helped. But that's usually my true north in terms of what I like to do when I do my own comics, which is what's not being done, what kind of stuff that I like when I was a kid that I can kind of filter through my own sensibility, and how weird can it get? Is sort of the tenet I live by.
But now that we are living every moment in this dystopian, science fiction future, I mean, here we are, we're zooming, like, just like that scene in Blade Runner, right?
Right.
Except nobody would answer the Zoom in their pajamas, I don't think. Nobody answers a Zoom. Well, they have like Apple Chat. I don't use that because no one's going to answer it in their pajamas, maybe. Anyway, I'm rambling. But now that we're living in this dystopian future, is it harder to be shocking?
No, there's always some depravity that hasn't been explored yet in comics anyway, that I seem to be able to mine. But I think maybe I'm mellowing out. Depravity, I guess, is not my main motivation anymore. It used to be. I've certainly done projects where I was like, this is going to piss some people off, or this is going to be strange in the environment that it comes out in. But I guess less so now. I actually don't know what phase I'm in now. I'm sequelizing myself. That's the phase I'm in.
You're having your very own nostalgia. Well, yeah, tell us a little about Junior Baker. I got it right, Junior Baker. And
That's right.
which is, so this is your pandemic project?
Well, it's the one that I wrote mostly during the pandemic. We started developing it beforehand. It's taken quite a few years to get it going.
I'm going to show some pages from it while you talk here, because
Okay.
we can do that. Yeah, look
Sure.
yeah, let me go back. There we go. Yeah, so
Yeah. Drawn by a new artist named Ryan Quackenbush, who is amazing. And this is his first kind of major published work. So I'm very proud to be associated with him on that. And yeah, I did a series about 12 years ago called Butcher Baker. Did it with artist Mike Huddleston, who is also an artistic genius, and that's one of my things I'm most proud of in terms of my own work in comics. And I've had this notion for this story kicking around for a couple of years, and when I found Ryan, I realized, well, he's the guy that could execute this the best, I think, considering what the story is. And it's kind of a spiritual sequel. There are threads that carry over, but it's definitely something you don't necessarily need to have read Butcher Baker to read this and get it. So it's fun. It looks good.
Yeah, it does. It looks fantastic. It looks fantastic. But you said the story broke in. There was a story about it in the Hollywood Reporter, and it's about a gonzo journalist. Is that right? Just gonzo.
He's an internet journalist that chases the weird stories, and he has a past that he's kind of ignoring, but it relates to the type of stories that he chases after, which is superhero related phenomena in a sort of a post-superhero world, which is, as he gets deeper and deeper, he's trying to find out what happened to them. I mean, in this world, he's living in a world where superheroes don't really exist anymore, not in the way that we're used to them. And he's trying to figure out why and what happened. And that story is obviously, that's sort of the A plot. The B plot is how he finds out about himself and learns a few things along the way. And it's the most personal thing I've written in a long time, which was exhausting, Heidi, I have to tell you.
Well, self-introspection or introspection can be exhausting. Well, but I mean, you said you did work on this during the pandemic. I mean, I talked about this in our first happy hour with Dean, just coming out of the pandemic. And, it's when I walk out of the streets of New York, you can't, aside from a few people wearing masks, which to be honest, it looks like a scene in an Asian city where you would see over the
Right.
years where people would be wearing masks. And in
Yeah.
general, they wore masks. In Asia, it was more accepted to wear masks because you felt sick, so you wouldn't infect others. So
Right.
little little different from America there, but yeah, it's those that time is kind of over. I find myself missing a little bit of it sounds weird to miss it, but I did miss having time. I missed having the time to really think about things and to good things and bad things. I don't miss the bad things, but
Well, it was
I
a cultural reset. It was a total cultural reset for the way that and it was maybe in a sort of odd way, it's probably, aside from maybe 9/11, it's the most shared experience of our lifetime, where everybody, even if you didn't believe it, if you thought it was a hoax or whatever your weirdness was about it, we were all going through it at the same time, everybody.
Mhm.
That is rare in a culture like ours. So I kind of look at it like that. And the other part about it is, maybe a lot of comic book guys or a lot of comic book creators feel this way. It wasn't that much different than our normal life where you're alone just writing all day. This just meant you didn't have any excuses not to.
Right.
So I got a lot of work done in the pandemic. A lot. I wrote a lot of shit. Now it's just starting to come out, but this is like the first of many things that will come out that were written in the past 2.5, 3 years.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, that's good. That you found it, I don't know, inspiring was the word, but you were able to adapt to it.
Yeah, I took advantage of it as
Yeah,
best I could.
yeah. Did you find that simplifying your life was what enabled that? I mean, we have so many harem scarum things and they're all back. I mean, it is, our gonzo world is coming back and having that quietness was kind of nice sometimes.
Well, it was, if you're, I've never really had any particular sense of FOMO for anything. So it wasn't that discombobulating for me. It was more of like, as a writer that's observing the world, it was interesting and scary and sort of like, I mean, it was an experience from a spectator level.
Mm,
And I think uh, my kids were the right age to not be completely traumatized by it. So that was good. And I think a lot of parents might say that, to look on the bright side of things, when you had years with your children that you might not have had otherwise,
mm,
like in close proximity.
yeah.
So that's just, I mean, that's one way where you can look at it through some prism of positivity, even though it was a horrible thing, and I would
Yeah.
prefer it not to have happened.
Yes. I'm not saying it was a I'm so happy the pandemic happened. I'm just saying
Yeah.
it is I mean we find these things in these dark times that um you know human beings we are naturally altruistic and optimistic, believe it or not. And so we try to
And very adaptive. I mean,
yes,
it was
we are.
strange to think back. It's like, you know, March of 2020, you didn't know what the hell was going on, and by May, when everything was really shut down, everybody just kind of adapted and got into the new routine, and that was it.
Mhm.
It's bizarre. The
Yeah,
bizarre was not as culturally chaotic as it could have been.
right.
You
That's right.
know,
Yeah. Well, but in your Hollywood Reporter um interview, you did mention that Junior Baker is a little bit about your own grappling with superheroes
yes.
and what they mean to your life. And I do want to expand on that a little bit to talk about um a career in superheroes, which I know you've spoken about before. But what was it that yeah, what made you think about that? What made you turn introspective about that?
Well, I mean, folks of our generation, we're the generation that straddles the two eras. We straddle the era of it being sort of a niche thing, an underground thing. I just mean, if you read you know, Avengers comics in 1980. It was a niche thing.
Right.
You know, it was, I didn't know any, there was maybe two or three other kids in my whole, you know, sphere of existence that read comics, you know, and you found those people and you hung on to them like, you know, grim death, because you just were, you
Mhm.
were finding your tribe. And now we see a world where it's like, it's almost monocultural in terms of the superhero influence in media and movies and TV. And it's crazy because this is the world that we wanted, or we thought that we wanted. And of course, as with
Right.
most people, once you get what you wanted, you start to rethink the whole goddamn thing.
Right. Of course. It's another constant human nature.
Yes. And so I went through that too, where, and you know, the reason um that it happened is because we all grew up and we all went into different fields, entertainment wise. You know, there's, I think, influence wise, there's no difference between, you know, comic book writers of my generation and the Kevin Feige's and the James Gunns of the film world. I mean, we all grew up on the same stuff, and we all got old enough and professional enough and successful enough to change the culture in that way, you know. So it's a strange thing to, you know, because so sometimes I get nostalgic for the times where it was just you and your comics and no one really knew. And but in terms of the material itself, I guess I started to question, what is it about superheroes that is supposed to speak to us as we get older, and as we, you know, because ostensibly you're supposed to kind of grow out of it. You know, that was the kind of the beauty of it, is every generation readopts the genre, or the, you know, these characters, and then they have it for a while, and then pass on to the next generation. I think we might have come to the end of that evolution. I
Mm.
don't, you know, because there's other things, there's video games, there's manga, there's whatever, you know, we all know the things. So the things that meant so much to me as a kid don't mean so much to the kids that are, the Gen Z has no attachment except maybe through the movies, but it's not the same as that personal comic book reading experience. So I know the relationship is different, if there is one at all. So thinking about that, I wanted to express that in some way that wasn't so obvious.
Mm.
So I had this sort of ability, you know, having being an owner of Butcher Baker, I can sequelize it for myself. I decided to kind of inject that as an element of the story. So it's not so on the nose in the comic itself, but I know what I'm grappling with, and I know what I'm struggling with. And it's funny, writing this series, I kind of figured it out for myself. So I'm sort of post superheroes, which brings me right back to superheroes in a weird way.
Mm.
It brings me right back to it being a very personal thing, a very um, you know, singular experience for me. I'm not looking to share it with anybody anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I know what I get out of it when I, you know, go back and read an old, you know, David Michelinie comic or whatever. I mean, and it doesn't matter what it,
Sorry, I just had to turn that back on. Yeah.
recording in progress.
Yeah,
That's
it
good.
is.
It
It's
stopped me from
record.
rambling further.
Yes. No. Well, that's a great theme, and that's a great segue to talking about um making a career doing this, you know, as a grown man. I mean, and I think about the freelancers that I worked with when I was first starting out in this business, and you know, they were career men. I mean, you could make a career in comics as a letterer or a colorist, you know, and you bought a house, you
Yeah.
know, and you had a wife and kids, and you know, dad went to either a studio, you know, some of them went to outside studios, or just, you know, went to the garage or whatever, and he sat there and he lettered all day. And you know, that
Right.
was, you could do that for a living. You could make a career out of that because there was the steady stream of superhero books coming that were, um you know, you would get work.
Right.
And somehow along the way, obviously the newsstand, we know the whole story. Like you said, you and I do kind of straddle that era, that shift from the newsstand to comic shops.
Right.
And, now we see, grown people making YouTube videos that are viewed by thousands of other grown people, just moaning and groaning about how the characters have changed
I love them.
and all of that. But uh, now to get a job at Marvel or DC is so difficult. Okay. And, let alone making the rates haven't changed in 25 years. How much is Joe, you're a good one to ask this. How much is your page rate gone up from like, say, 2000 to now?
Oh, hardly at all.
Hardly at all.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even worth mentioning. I mean, it's so incremental since then. Well, no, I would say since 2005. I had a pretty good run in the early aughts, but
Right.
From like 2000, so for the past 15 or so years, it hasn't really
Right.
changed at
And
all.
then I could plug that into the inflation calculator. And even though we're having very bad real inflation now, there's always incremental inflation, but that's probably, just making a ballpark guess, that's probably like 2/3. Like your actual income from your page rate has probably declined 2/3 in that
Yeah,
time. To possibly, I wouldn't say it's half. Half would be from the 90s, but I'd say it's about 2/3. So, and that's universal. I mean, people are still being paid $25 to letter a page. I paid them that at Disney Adventures in 1994.
yeah,
So that's like less than half. That's like in 1994 dollars, you're paying them like 11 or $12 a page.
yeah.
So and there's so many things that factor all into this, but like how the hell do you make a living even doing this anymore?
Well, you can't. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's rarefied air because the what's ironic is that I feel like a lot of the best people who do it have the ambition to diversify anyway. It's not that they're forced to, is that opportunities come up and they take them. This is exactly what happened to me. Like I said, I broke in not having any plan, not even considering that it would be a career. And then I got in and somehow I stayed in, and it did become a career for many years, which all I was doing was writing comics and making a pretty good living at it. Now I did what I had to do to maneuver through the business and get to high priced gigs and, high profile gigs. So I had a sense of like, well, if I'm going to make a career out of it, I've got to take these jobs and angle for these positions, jockey for this gig and that gig, whatever it was. So that lasted almost a decade, I think, for me. And then other opportunities started to come up just as I was starting to feel like maybe I'd done it all in comics. So the animation stuff started to happen. Some, movie stuff started to happen. And I was curious about those fields. I was ambitious enough to kind of dive in. And as it turns out, they coincided with my life kind of advancing to where I needed to level up in my income and all that. So it really worked out. And then every time I would dip back into comics, it would be painfully obvious that I would never be able to make a living doing them again solely. I had to relegate them. I mean, the image stuff you do on spec anyway, but I mean, every time I would sort of engage with Marvel or DC, and to this day, if that's the case, I'm doing it for the love of the game. It's not to cover my monthly nut by any stretch.
Mhm.
So it's all about having that realistic perspective on the thing, and that's what you got to do.
Yeah, but you were fortunate in that you did find, Man of Action. So which is let's see if I get Joe Kelly, Duncan Rouleau, and Steve Siegel, right?
Correct.
Okay, so the four of you, when did Man of Action begin?
I think in 2000 is when we officially kind of kicked it off.
Mhm.
And that was, you know, we seem very smart now. It seemed very prescient to kind of pool our resources, not knowing that the culture was going to change so much, and that having your comic book bona fides would actually be a benefit in certain
Right,
areas.
right.
You know? Because it
Yeah.
certainly wasn't when I broke in. When I broke in 96, 97, it still seemed to be like, even if you had a career, you weren't going to go anywhere else with it. It was the exceptions were not anything that I was interested in. Like, you know, Jerry Conway went from writing for DC to writing Law and Order.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
a weird exceptional jump that I couldn't even wrap my head around, and I didn't want to write Law and Order anyway, you know. So I didn't have any idea that so many opportunities would open up from doing comics, but they did, and we sort of collectively took advantage of them and jumped in with both feet. And once the Ben 10 thing happened, it was a whole new career path opened up, one that thankfully was much more lucrative. And you got to, when those opportunities come up as a freelancer at heart, which is what we all are, we had to go for it. You know,
Mhm.
you got to go for those opportunities when they come up. Because my philosophy about that stuff is, I wasn't even a big animation guy. I was not a Jones and to do cartoons. But my philosophy has always been, you know what's going to happen if you don't try something or you don't do something. It's just things will be the same. You don't, but you know, taking that risk or taking that chance, you might not know what's going to happen, but at least something different will happen, even if it's complete failure,
Right.
you know, which you can learn from as much as anything. So,
I mean, you must have had, like, I can't imagine that the four of you sat down in a room on day one and said, hey, let's, do this thing called Ben 9. And then you kicked it around a little bit and said, well, Ben 10's a better name. And then you went in and sold it. But I mean, how long did it take to get from that four guys in a room to, I mean, pitching? It was on Nickelodeon, right? So
Cartoon
it was a
Network.
Cartoon Network, right? And, pitching it to Cartoon Network and it going into production.
Well, it's one of those things. I think it was probably 2003 when, I mean, from being in comics, and you know, we knew all the guys at Wizard Magazine, right, as we all did, and Matt Senreich was a good buddy of ours,
Mhm.
and by then Matt had hooked up with Seth, and they were starting the Robot Chicken stuff. So Matt had an in at Cartoon Network, and when they were telling him that they had been doing the DC properties, you know, Teen Titans and things like that, but they wanted an original, what they said, an original superhero show that they could own, basically. So they wouldn't have to deal with the DC, what they call the DC nonsense, which is funny because now they're all wedded together in
Yeah.
unholy matrimony for till the end of time. But so Senreich hooked us up with the guys at Cartoon Network, and we just went in and pitched. And it took about 3 or 4 years, or about 3 years of development before it started airing. And I remember at the time thinking, well, all right. I mean, it's so incremental. It's first they like the idea, then they make a deal for the pilot, and then you write the pilot. You know, it's
Right.
all that stuff. So I remember thinking, well, this, you know, ultimately this will be maybe a line on my resume that we got to do a pilot, that we got to write a pilot that, you know, as they always say in the parentheses, unproduced.
Right. Right.
But it's, you know, something that we didn't have on our resume before, so why not? And then it took off and became what it became, and that, again, like I said, it set us on a whole different path, you know.
But if you could talk a little bit about in terms of Ben 10, having created it. I mean, obviously you split it with three other people, but I mean, it was a licensing bonanza, right?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Because based on what you're saying, Cartoon Network wanted to have a property that they could own and they could license out. And also, it does sound counterintuitive, but I know from my own time working at Warner Brothers and Disney that finding a good property for boys is not that easy.
Yeah.
They're, believe it or not, they're always looking for things for boys because girls somehow or other, girls will watch anything, but boys won't. There has to be, especially, hey boys, this is safe for you to
Yeah.
watch. Hopefully that's changing a little bit, but so yeah, it was something that it was. I mean, it was on, I don't know if there were actual underoos, but I know there were pajamas.
Yeah.
And there was definitely like, trapper keepers, Ben 10 trapper keepers.
Yeah.
And so how much of a revenue stream was the licensing for this show for you?
We did very well. We did very well. I mean, listen, I'll be honest, I'm still out there working. So, it's not
Yeah,
like we made, like the nut of a lifetime,
right.
but it was the luckiest break that the four of us have ever had. Every time we talk about sort of like we're talking about company businesses, career things, and we're sort of musing about certain things, I always try to remind him, look, if you're lucky, you get one Ben 10 in your career, one. You can't expect another one. And I don't expect another one.
Mhm.
But in terms of the financial freedom it provided at a time where the comics were I was coming to the end of that first run of like a lot of work and a lot of exposure and, building my career and building my name. Thanks to Ben 10, I was able to kind of lay back and not stress about,
Mhm.
oh my God, I need to, get that run on Hawkman going or whatever it is. I was, not that I don't love Hawkman. I
Yeah,
mean, God bless Hawkman, but I mean, it wasn't a financial priority. Now that's why in the 2010s, I had a run of image books that I was basically self-financing because I could afford to do it.
right.
And that's more than anything, that's what Ben 10 brought me career-wise, was the ability to do all these image books that I own or co-own and build my library. So that's the only way the money is so like, it's there and then you spend it and it's not there and you make some more and you spend it and you're just living your life. But the fact that now I can look at a bookshelf full of image titles, that's the real sort of payoff for that Ben 10 success for me.
Is there any way to quantify, I mean, writing animation is still not signatory to the Writers Guild, correct?
Nope.
Right. So
Correct.
you don't get all those. So you're not going to be striking unless you're in sympathy strike. Um, but and is there any way to quantify just in terms of again the economic structure? I mean, do people get paid more to write animation now than they did 15 years ago? Have those rates gone up at all?
I think, well, I think baseline rates are been fairly steady. I mean, for us, our quotes have raised.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like in any business. I mean, you keep going and every
Right.
job you kind of incrementally go up and up. But in terms, I mean, I think writing for animation is it's fairly competitive financially. I mean, you can make some decent money as a writer in animation. I mean, way more than comics.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
Well, I mean, even what you just said, like, oh yeah, your rate goes up. I mean, that just doesn't happen in comics.
No.
There's a few. I mean, I'm sure, Tom King and Scott Snyder and James Tynion. Okay, they probably are getting higher rates, but it's not like they go in. I mean, I'm speaking for them. Hopefully, they'll be on this happy hour at some point, and can answer that for themselves. But even they, I'm sure, don't go in and say, hey, for my new book, I want to get a $50 page
Right.
raise. That just doesn't happen.
No, there have been deals that I've heard of in comics that were comics exclusive that I don't think will ever be made again. I don't want to name names, but
No.
they're outrageous amounts of money for the work that's being done. And and they will not happen again. And the other thing about it is the marketplace and the culture, the fan culture and the comic press culture doesn't exist anymore to prop up creators to that sort of, I hate to use the word, but that superstar status where you put a guy on a title and it moves the needle. I mean, now
Right.
it's to the point where you can't put a high paid artist on a struggling title to boost that title because it's not cost effective for the publisher. You've got to put the big name artist or the big name writer on the big name IP and then hope that the guys that you're paying nothing and have no name value whatsoever, and you put them on, Squirrel Girl or whatever, and that there'll be some alchemy or lightning will strike, and then you can take those creators and move them to the big properties.
Right.
It's a weird field team exercise.
I never thought of it in quite exactly those terms, but that is a really great way to put it. Now, why do you think that is? I mean, it's been said that after the image creators broke off in the early 90s, and because they had become such gigantic superstars, that Marvel and DC both were kind of like, never again. We're never going to let the creators become bigger than the characters again. Do you think do you think it is because the companies are not? I think for a while they chose not to do it. Now I don't think they even could.
Well, I think it took about 30 years for that to bear out. I think we're in that now, because if you think about it, I mean, this is the kind of stuff I think about way too much. The reaction to the image boom and that image aesthetic, which is of no fault of anybody that propagated it or did it or whatever, because those guys made their mark, and there's no doubt about it. But the reaction to that was that the writer driven era of comics, which lasted from like the late 90s to the late aughts. It was about a 10-12 year period there, where the writers got propped up because they could do more work. And I have my theory that the writer driven era of comics also coincided with the internet kind of really taking hold. But before you could get anything but text on the internet, that's when writers could kind of step in and really build their personality cults. And we all know what we're talking about there. And I was a part of that movement too.
Yeah.
As soon as the internet caught up technologically and you could display art perfectly online, then the balance went back to, being writers and artists. But for a while there, the writers were definitely in control. But now we're finally at the point where it is the characters, and it is the sort of the editorially driven, and it's not going to be about superstar creators anymore. I mean, I can't see it happening, because where is the venue to declare those superstars, and to anoint those? There's no Wizard magazine anymore that everybody read, that you could say, I mean, I benefited from that as much as anybody. I got my Teen Beat, photo spread in Wizard magazine. And it took my career jumped, a huge level because of it.
Wow. I mean,
there's nothing like that anymore.
No, I mean, I know that Laura Hudson and Tim.
Oh, the Comics Alliance.
Yeah, I can't remember Tim's last name. He's gonna kill me, but I haven't seen him in so long. They did Comics Foundry, and they kind of, they were trying to bring that sense. They were trying to do Wizard for good comics. Sorry, no offense, but and they would do, Tim was incredibly, and I'm gonna have to look up his name, or if anybody's listening remembers what Tim's last name was, but he was an incredibly talented art director. So they did do, like Scott Pilgrim, Brian Lee O'Malley was on the cover, and it was the tail end. It's interesting to talk about the tail end of look, I'm just gonna say it. I mean, it's the Warren Ellis era of the the Ellis Forum and all that. Delphi forums were a thing. And it really was, it was a time, like you said, where writers were really creating their own personas. And Comic Foundry kind of came in as part of that, and it provided a very nice transition. But then came social media, and it all went curse, splatta boom. And now, Joe, I want to talk a little bit more about, go back to Junior Baker, because you did a little teaser campaign for it, and we had been talking. I mean, secret, Joe and I do talk when we're not doing a Zoom, but we catch up with each other pretty on the regular. But you don't have Twitter,
right?
You don't have a really website. You don't even have a newsletter. Not everybody's got a newsletter. They must have asked you if you wanted to join Substack. right?
Well, no, because I was so off the radar that no one thought to ask me, but I wasn't sweating it. I mean,
Ah, that cranky old Casey,
yeah,
old man Casey up in the
yeah,
hill.
get off my lawn.
Yeah.
No, I've thought about it, but I certainly sort of mused about what kind of presence I would have in that space. And I've certainly got a lot of material that I could post that would
Oh,
maybe be interesting to people. But if I'm choosing between that and writing an actual comic book, I'll take the comic book any day of the week.
but 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 Joe, I think what we're what we talk about a lot in our conversations and in what we're talking about now also is that your income as a comics writer, all right, you're the lucky one who has a TV show, all right, so that you co-created, so you're very privileged. But as a comics writer, your income is steadily going down, 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 because page rates don't change, so you have to find other ways to make money. You have to, and I mean, artists, there's such a thriving convention circuit now, where you see people, road warriors, out every week, and they're selling their art, they're selling prints, and that's how they make their money now. And I've seen writers sell their books. I mean, you set up sometimes, but you're not a real road warrior. But so one of the ways that writers are building their audience, which is what you have to do, is through social media. So I'm just curious as to why you don't why you haven't taken advantage of that.
Well, I mean, I've never been in that superstar status. I've never had that superstar status. I've just kind of been in the trenches, which is always where I wanted to be. That I never had any aspirations. My heroes are the Mike Barons and the David Michelinis out there. I mean, those are my guys. And they were, I mean, I love Frank Miller, I love Alan Moore, but I'll take Howard Chaykin any day of the week. You know what I mean? So my heroes were not the pinnacle of the industry. They're not there. So I never had that ambition. And I felt like when the social media thing really happened in 2010 or whatever, around there, I kind of felt like I'd been in the business about 13 years at that point. And I felt like I'd done the X-Men and Superman and Avengers and all this, Iron Man. I'd done a lot of stuff. If I hadn't built an audience by then, it wasn't going to happen by me going out and telling people what I had for breakfast that day, which is all I thought Twitter was at the beginning, and,
Yeah.
and again, I don't have a FOMO personality. So I don't feel like I can sort of put that on everybody else. Nobody wants to know what I'm doing aside from the work that I'm doing. So and to be honest, I always think that everything is a fad that will soon go away. So why get involved if it's just going to go away?
Right.
And I was right about MySpace. MySpace came and went. And that was my kind of example. I thought, well, if MySpace comes and goes, then everything's going to come and go. Well, I was totally wrong about that.
Yeah.
Because everything else seemed to stick around, although things come and they go, but it's just not me. And I feel like I'm enough of a loudmouth in real life, right?
IRL.
Yeah, that I'm just asking for trouble if I want to go out and engage on those platforms. I would just say something stupid and get myself inadvertently canceled, and who needs that aggravation?
Right. Okay. Well, I guess that makes sense. Now, for Junior Baker, you did do a little teaser campaign. That Image sent out a bunch of teaser images, and for Butcher Baker Righteous Maker, which came out how long ago? 10
about 12 years ago.
12 years ago. Okay. Wow. Boy, time flies. And you had done a series of teasers for that. So you wanted to create some kind of buzz for it. But I mean, it's super hard to publicize comics now. I mean, I gotta be honest, you had a story in the Hollywood Reporter, which is pretty much the pinnacle of showbiz media, and then you had said, oh, Heidi, the story, because I wrote about your teasers, and then you told me the story was up, and then it was like Friday, and I was like, oh, I'll do this at the end of the day. And then I went to WonderCon, and I came back, and I was like, oh, let me look. And I mean, it didn't get picked up by that many outlets. I was kind of shocked.
I mean, once you're in the whole mechanism and and a cog in the media machine, the Hollywood Reporter is nice, but it's not a game changer in any stretch. And by the way, the difference between 13 years ago and now, Butcher Baker, we did like 30 teasers over 30 days. For Junior Baker, we did 4 over 4 days, because
Wow.
I understand the attention span of people is a lot less than it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to say, if anybody watching has some questions, you can put them in the chat. And Tamar, our animation editor, just wanted to shout out your Bob Marley marijuana graphic novel.
The Marijuana Man, also
Yeah.
with raw food, yeah.
Yes, and just talking about licensing, that My Little Pony definitely was the big game changer. Yes, and absolutely.
My Little
That
Pony. What I didn't write My Little Pony. I had
No, but I'm just saying in terms of how comics were merchandised,
right,
or how,
right.
excuse me, how animation was merchandised. It was, such a huge hit in the merch game
Yeah.
that it definitely opened a lot of doors there. So yeah, if anybody has any questions or comments, they can throw them up in the chat, and I'll be checking. I want to talk about America Chavez
Okay.
and Marvel. And
Okay.
before we went live, I was just asking you, so you haven't written for Marvel or DC in about 10 years. So you've been big two free,
Yeah.
but they finally got small enough again for you. I feel. But yeah, you co-created America Chavez. And I don't think you are claiming that the first iteration of her was the one that caught on. I mean, Jamie and Kieran, I think they were the ones who put her in Young Avengers. But you did
Right.
co-create her, and
Yeah.
you're supposed to. It's supposed to mean something.
Well, okay, here's the thing. I mean, it means something personally because I'm proud of the character and how far she's gone. I had, I made a bit of a stink about it last year when the Doctor Strange movie came out. Nothing has changed. I've gotten nothing from Marvel on that character yet. Here's sort of the tea I will spill. The problem with this whole setup, with this creator participation agreements that Marvel has, is that they're not one size fits all. And they seem very arbitrary in what they choose to pay people. It seems to me anyway. If they have just said, look, it was work for hire, you signed the voucher, you have no rights, we owe you nothing. You knew that going in, you're a grown man. We pay nothing. Work for hire, that's it. I could swallow that. That's pretty cut and dry. But the fact that they sort of dangle different amounts to different creators seems very sketchy to me. It's very smoky in its morality, its business morality. It's like, how do you decide what you pay one creator versus paying another creator differently for doing essentially the same thing? It's one, whether it's different relationships you have with different creators, it shouldn't matter. If you're gonna, it should be a one size fits all kind of system. And the agreements themselves are sort of onerous in the fact that they leave that wiggle room right there in black and white, which they will itemize things and they will say, we'll pay you up to this amount and up to that amount for this media translation or this action figure or whatever it was. And I just find that to be disingenuous on a business level. It's like, oh, so up to $1 million means you could pay me $1 million, you pay me $1. And you're deciding that. The company is deciding that. On what basis? I have no idea. There was one article that where it talked about Marvel's definition of a cameo in a movie, and that they would base payment on it just being a cameo versus like a featured character. Well, according to their metrics, which they said, it was like some percentage of the movie. Like if it's a character's in less than 15% of the movie, that's considered a cameo. So by that standard, if you break it down mathematically, then Darth Vader was a cameo in the first Star Wars.
Right.
Captain America was a cameo in Avengers Endgame. You know, it makes no sense whatsoever. It's lawyers and all, and just a bunch of bullshit.
And America Chavez was far from a cameo. She was the co-star of the movie.
Well, they weren't claiming it for Doctor Strange. They were just sort of setting it down as like in the future, just as they were trying to make a deal, and they were just kind of trying to set definitions. And that was just the most ridiculous.
But let me go back a little bit because you know, this has been a thing in comics since day one, since Siegel and Schuster, and you know, the original Sin. And in the 70s and into the 80s, it became you know, and I'd say that DC was really the leader in this. I do think Jeanette Kahn, who had come in as the publisher at DC, was really serious about this. And Paul Levitz, a lot of props to Paul. Paul knew it was the right thing to do. And so I do know, I mean, at DC, it's notorious. They are scrupulous. They will send you a check for like $1 sometimes, right? And I although I understand now that after it's kind of, you know, gone through AT&T and now Discovery and all that, it's become less regular. But when Paul Levitz was running the ship, to be fair, to give him all the credit, they were very, very scrupulous about paying. And, you know, you signed, but they also made you sign that contract. Like you could not walk out the door with like, oh, I'll mail it in. Oh, no, you know, you had to, they were very scrupulous, but making sure you signed the paperwork. Now, it's my understanding that Marvel also has I believe it's called an character equity deal.
That's right. Yeah.
And, you know, Marvel has always been very fast and loose about paperwork. And they've lost almost all of the paperwork over the years that would prove who owned what. But they're just lucky that, you know, Disney has the world's best lawyers. But I think you mentioned you didn't even sign the character equity.
They've sent me character equity agreements over the years for different things. I've never signed one.
And that does not stop them. Whereas at DC, you would not get away with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's been the sentiment that I've heard through various parties that Marvel doesn't really they understand that they're going to be hit in the press every once in a while, but they feel like they can weather those storms and just carry on business as usual. And for the most part, they've been right, you know, and it's just, I don't even know where it's going to end up. I mean, I'm still sort of, my lawyer's still sort of back and forth with them on this, and I have no idea where it's going to end up. You know, there seems to be no light at the end of that tunnel. They'll just continue, you know, I mean, exploiting is not the right word, but I mean, they're just not doing right by the people who created these characters.
And you know, to be fair, I mean, an even more egregious example. I mean, we'll use this pretty egregious because you did very clearly create the character of America Chavez. What's her name is Ms. America. And you know, she's going to be in, there's going to be, you know, they're assuming there's a Young Avengers movie and there's all these young kid, you know, TV shows. So I mean, it's just assumed that she's going to be in a lot more stuff on Disney Plus, if nowhere else. And
well, we don't know that now because things are starting to contract a little bit. And I think that the characters that didn't exactly, I mean, she didn't exactly dominate that Doctor Strange movie, you know, and this is what happens, by the way. This is what happens when you translate these characters before they're fully baked. She was never on strong footing in the comics, ever. I mean, I only got to introduce her. And then in Young Avengers, she was one of the team, so she didn't get the focus she deserved. And then it just went off the rails in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of readers would agree with that. And when you take characters that have not been fully baked and try to translate them, what are you translating? You know, what are you adapting? You don't know what you're adapting. So then you have to make shit up. And that's where you get she's scared by a fucking bumblebee and her parents are dead. You know?
That's that's right. I mean, I was just going to say that Ed Brubaker has obviously also gone public with his Winter Soldier, and
Yeah,
you have an even more. I mean, his case is very clear that it was baked in your own words very well, and just that the whole Winter Soldier storyline is part and parcel of the whole MCU. It's one of the key stories in the MCU because Bucky
yeah,
is one of the most beloved characters, and his whole tortured storyline is one that the fans absolutely adore. Um, and Tamara's pointing out that they completely retconned her origin in the comics a year or two ago. So,
yeah.
I guess that's called casification.
Yeah,
Trying to I mean, DC tried to do that with Superboy over the years and all that.
yeah,
Um, and there's some people who have had a really great case, like Jim Starlin with Thanos. I mean, he had his high school notebooks. He didn't throw them out. And so he had
yeah.
to clear his, and I'm glad they did right by Jim Starlin.
Well, we don't know what they did for Jim Starlin. We know that Jim Starlin seems satisfied. But we
Yes,
don't know what Jim Starlin's personal metrics for satisfaction are.
that's true. That is
So
true.
one man's satisfaction is another man's
So
dissatisfaction.
do you think though that I mean, some of the optics of this are horrible. I mean, I'm not going to say, obviously you've said yourself, I mean, you're doing well. It's not like you're a starving comics creator who has nothing to fall back on. So,
Right.
but the optics, sometimes it is, elderly creators and, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, Bill Mantlo, obviously whatever they did for Bill Mantlo was enough for his brother to feel satisfied. That was pretty, very tragic optics of Bill Mantlo being hospitalized for the
Yeah.
majority of his life. So yeah, I mean, there's still a lot more of this to come. I mean, I think we're kind of entering the twilight of the MCU though. I mean, I think it's kind of like reached peak and now it's kind of like we might not see every tiny background character in, whoever stood around in a panel of Secret Wars get their own miniseries on Disney Plus
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of people, I've heard that, Endgame was like, I mean, we see it in comics all the time. There's the jumping on points and then there's the jumping off points. And Endgame was a pretty great jumping off point if you were so inclined. And it's, the challenge for the MCU is that after that, they have to make things matter again
Mm.
without the benefit of the star power that was fueling the first, three phases. And for me, they haven't quite proven that it matters yet.
I mean, I will say, I think WandaVision, which came out at the beginning of the second year of the pandemic, that was great. That was like
Sure.
that hit on all cylinders, and obviously, Elizabeth Olsen's performance was insanely great, really, really good, and but then it never, to me, it's never, it's been fun since then, but it hasn't. You're right, it hasn't had the meaning. A couple of comments here. Tamara says, thank you. I couldn't help but laugh at the Bumblebee thing. Sure, that wasn't the intent.
Laugh or
Smotlock,
cry. Yeah,
yeah.
laugh or cry.
Smotlock says, talked to Joe a couple times, the WEF chat room back in the day. He was always super nice and approachable. Big fan of his comics work too, especially Wildcats volumes 2 and 3 and Godland. Well, Godland, that's a good one.
Yeah.
The your Joe Kirby homage
Yeah.
with Tom Scioli.
Yes.
That was a fun book. I mean, yeah, your Image stuff. I mean, you've had these moments of extreme I don't know even what the word is. I don't know. That book really caught on. Godland was a really good book, and people really dug the vibe of it also. So
I think that at least I can say that my comics, even though some of them have been adapted, are not movie pitches in disguise.
that is true. Now,
No, not in any way.
so did okay, I see we're an hour in. I feel like we could go another hour. So I am going to go over an hour because nobody
Okay,
can fucking stop us. And
that's right.
you could swear at the end of YouTube videos now. As long as you don't like go totally blue in the first minute, they're okay with it. So,
Excellent.
um, um, I mean, you did just kind of skimming over this, but like you did make a movie out of Officer Downe. And
Yes.
did you create that comic to be a movie, or was that just the one that you
No,
decided that it was going to be the best movie?
that was a gag. Burnham and I had done another graphic novel together called Nixon's Pals, which Burnham likes better for some reason. He's always touting that as the better of the two that we did. And Officer Downe was just kind of like a gag. It was like, I mean, I'd had the character idea for a while, and I was just looking for something fun to do with Chris. And I pitched him this, hey, well, I got this character. He's like, great, and it wasn't even a graphic novel. It was more like a one shot that we sort of expanded into sort of a larger hardcover. But that was like, there was no designs that would ever be anything. I mean, nothing I've ever done has been designed to be anything but a comic book. So when that got adapted and had some interest, I was like, okay, that's weird. But the good thing about it was, ultimately we made it in the same vein as I did my Image Comics in the first place, which is we got private equity. It was a totally independent feature, no studio involved until we made it. So it still had that DIY kind of feeling, even though it was several $1 million that we were, DIY.
I mean, that's the, catering budget on most movies. So
Yes.
yeah. I mean, can we see Officer Downe now? Is it streaming anywhere?
I don't know what platform it's on now, because when something gets into the streaming cycle, it'll be somewhere for like a year, and then it'll make a new deal and go. Or so. I mean, it's been on Netflix, it's been on Amazon, it's been on. I think it might be on Tubi at this point.
Well, Tubi and Pluto and Fubo are the ones. Anything that has a U in it, YouTube, Fubo, Pluto. These are our new late night, UHF channel. This is our new public access, because I sometimes find I prefer, I mean, because I'm old, I kind of love the concept of linear TV. I love the idea of just sitting there and something coming at me and not having to sit and look at literally 1,000 different options and choose one. So I'll
tell you something that might make a media headline, because I don't know if anybody's talked about this, because somebody told me this that would know that one of the biggest streaming series, I think on Amazon right now, is Columbo from the 70s, the Peter Falk.
I mean, Joe, that's not newsworthy, because my family, that's all they do is watch Columbo. And I've tried, when I go home to Maine, my parents just are watching Columbo. But I Zoom with my parents every Sunday. I'm like, what are you doing? We're watching Columbo.
But it's not just older people who watch back in the day, it's younger people too.
Yeah.
That's the part that kills me. It's like they want that type of story. They get into that type of storytelling. Now, I'm sure there's the retro vibe to it, and it's sort of a window into a different era that people get into that weren't around at the first time. But the fact that, you can look at something once and get the retro out of your system, you get the nostalgia out of your system, even if it's not your own nostalgia. But for it to be a perennial, have that perennial viewership is amazing to me.
Yeah. Well, it's a great character, and it's a great performance, and it's a great gimmick. Just a couple comments. Smotlock wants to know, has Automatic Kafka been collected yet?
No, and I'm pissed off about it. They won't collect it, and they won't give it back to me.
Why? So this is owned by Wildstorm at DC.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of, we had participation in it, but it wasn't a creator-owned series.
Oh, but have you tried lately? Because I've heard they're giving a lot of stuff back now.
Yes, I've tried lately.
All right.
So, listen, anything is possible in terms of something being collected. And like I said, we were talking about being omnibized, and I never would have thought that whole stuff would be collected ever. Certainly not in a big fat ball crushing hardcover. So there's I think a lot of stuff. I mean, I feel like in terms of mainstream, slightly off center 80s style superhero comics, my stuff that I did at Wildstorm was the best of that stuff. So they've collected Wildcats occasionally over the years, but the Automatic Kafka's not been collected. The Intimates hasn't been collected.
Oh, Intimates by industry superstar Giuseppe Camuncoli.
Yes.
Camo. Yeah, it's a great team.
Gigs.
Yeah. Yeah, well, hopefully somebody got to the end of the video. All right, I have one last question for you, Joe. This
Okay.
is sort of actually kind of ties together a lot of what we've been talking about for the last little bit. I just mentioned that Columbo is a great character, and obviously Peter Falk's great performance. I mean, it's magic. It is magic that
Yes.
Columbo is just something
Fantastic.
that, Patrick McGowan and
Yeah.
Ted Knight. I mean, it's just the guest stars, Jennifer Walters, all that. Um, and just, what we've just been talking about with America Chavez. I mean, there is a chilling effect at mainstream comics, at the big two, about creating new characters because of this.
That's right.
And I mean, people purposely don't create new characters, right? Or, I mean, James Tynion, when he created Punchline, he created, this new Joker sidekick, and he kind of had to go on an apology tour, not apology tour, but he went out of his way to explain why he was creating a new character for DC
Yeah.
Comics. And that's and even what you were saying about America Chavez never really getting developed. And, I mean, she did have, she did get her own series. And but yeah, I mean, there was so much controversy about the character too, which I'm not even gonna get into. But I mean, this is incredibly damaging and stultifying. Maybe this is why the big two do not appeal to young readers anymore. They don't have any new characters that they can identify with.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, that's the thing. I mean, I wouldn't even consider creating something new for those publishers because I mean, I thought I knew the deal. I did know the deal even way back then when I, with America Chavez. I just had a momentary lapse of like, I mean, this was, just as the MCU was starting when I created that character. And I just never, I thought there's so many characters they're going to go through before they get to this one. I just never, I mean, I didn't even have that thought. It just seemed, because it's one of those things. It's like that, what do you call it? Imposter syndrome, where you think, well, yes, I'm writing comics for Marvel, but nothing I do is going to matter in the way that, it mattered to me when I was a kid and read them, it just doesn't feel the same when you're the one doing it. So I never even had the thought, and I've created other characters for Marvel, here and there. I feel like I've not totally given over to that even from early on, but I've done it enough that I should have known better. But sometimes you learn these lessons the hard way. And I honestly have no regrets because, again, my beef with Marvel is not about the money. It's about the situation. It's about the contract. It's about the smoky details that, I don't feel I'm getting screwed necessarily, but I feel like under these conditions, other people that can't afford to be screwed are going to get screwed.
Right. Listen, you shouldn't be sorry about America Chavez. I mean, I play her on Marvel Strike Force. She is a character who's really, found her way into the Young Avengers. And, I think as a queer Latina young character, I mean, I think she has found a lot of fans. I mean, she means a lot to a lot of people. She means a lot to a lot of people.
I'm insanely proud of the character and where the character is gone. I feel a bit of ambivalence about how, I'm trying to say this in the right way. I mean, let's just put it this way. She's been colored every skin type you could imagine over the course of her publishing history. Never consistent, never, and they've, what I've seen is them retconning her background to accommodate for some of those alterations that were probably made under deadline.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can tell you this: if you're coloring a Marvel comic and you color Captain America too dark, you're going to hear from your editor. You know what I'm saying? But somehow the many different shades of skin tone got past a lot of editors over the years.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Which means that the priorities might not have been in place about when I created the character. What I was trying to get across was a cultural specificity. Now, how well I did is always up to debate. It's very subjective because she was a superhero in a superhero story. So it wasn't like I was going home to her, you know,
Mhm.
house and seeing how she lived with her family and all that kind of stuff. I didn't get a chance to get into that stuff, but the intent was for her to represent a certain segment of the culture. And as it went on, she got appropriated in the moment by different. I mean, first she was Latina, then she was Afro-Latina, then she was Puerto Rican, then I mean, as though
Mm,
what's the difference? But there is a goddamn difference.
yeah.
There's a big difference. And that laziness, and that's all it comes down to. I mean, it's not malicious, it's just lazy. But
Yeah.
that's why they fall down on their fucking faces every time when they talk about representation and things. And I'm talking about, in this case, Marvel, because we saw with that new Warriors comic from a couple of years ago that never came out with, you know, those weirdo characters like Safe Space and what I mean, it's so obvious that it's hilarious. But at least those were more cultural types and not ethnicities that were just missing the mark.
Mm,
So
mm,
I don't want to say how bad it probably feels to somebody who thinks that they're being represented by a character. And then the next time they see that character, they are representing another group that's not them. I mean, that's gotta hurt, you know?
well,
So
there's a
that's,
lot.
you know,
Yeah, there's a lot of
yeah,
different forces out there for sure.
yeah.
And
Again, I chalk it up to nothing more than laziness in this case, but it's still a bit sad that it happened, you know,
mm,
because you know, I've gone online and see people arguing about what is America Chavez's ethnicity, what is her cultural background, and they have to argue about it, and that should never have been the case because that
right.
just we live in a time, not to be too preachy, but we're trying to avoid that kind of nonsense.
Mm,
You know, we're trying to get past that kind of nonsense. And a publisher, a big publisher like Marvel Comics or DC Comics has a responsibility to be extra careful in those situations. And they just, in America Chavez's case, they were not. They were not careful. And now you've got this character that has a, a diminished potential to do what she was supposed to do originally. And that's, you know, that's the only part about her publishing history that kind of makes me sad, I guess.
yeah. Yeah.
A
Well,
lot to unpack there, Heidi. A
there's
lot
a
to
lot.
unpack.
There's a lot to unpack with the future of the big two, but we'll have to save that for our next happy hour because
That's right.
our happy hour is over. But we do have Junior Baker to look forward to. And when is that coming out?
August.
August. Okay.
August is the first issue.
So we have a little bit of time, and we will look forward to seeing to reading that. I look forward to your musings on the role of the superhero in our you know, middle-aged lives. I'm just going to say it. So, you know, as we age, what is the role? I look forward to your musings on that. Joe, thank you so much for taking some time to come here and hang out and talk. And you know, early I had my little list of people for the happy hour, and I said, who do I know who was definitely going to talk for an hour? And you were right at the top of the list, and you didn't disappoint.
Well, I got plenty to say, Heidi. I've been
I
sitting on my ass for 3 years now. It's time to get out there and stir this shit up
All
again.
right. Well, I'm happy to have given you the shit stirring paddle for this time. But Joe, thank you so much for joining us again. I'm Heidi McDonald at The Beat, comicsbeat.com. And thank you to our patrons, Patreons, whatever. I don't even know what to call you. Anyway, thanks, Smutlock and Tamara. Everybody else who tuned in, really appreciate your support. We will be doing these regularly going on. We got some business folks coming up. But you can
Oh,
always also let us know who you'd like to see me sit down with for an hour and shoot the breeze. So Joe, anyway, take care. Have a great day. And we'll see you out there in Comics
somewhere.
Land.